So wetware is an interesting term. Have you guys heard wetware before? Uh, it's in the training community an attempt to sort of catch the attention of software guys. So you have software, hardware, and the people who operate those systems are wetware because water destroys computers, but it's essential to life. And so the single biggest challenge that we face in open source is talent. There's not enough of it. So anybody here tried to hire open source talent the past 10 years?
We need 25 people right now.
Exactly. It has been for Linux, and so I'll back up and maybe just give you a snapshot of the Linux Foundation. So I think people probably know Linux is the #1 operating system in the world. It's the dominant operating system on everything except desktop computers. The entire cloud is powered by Linux, et cetera, et cetera. The Linux Foundation is a nonprofit that governs Linux. It used to be that we were very focused about the Linux code base and where's the kernel going and what are the development paths and things like security. More recently, we've started to worry about the fact that the code has been so successful that there's actually not enough people. And so while it's been a best time ever to be a Linux sysadmin, right? Wage inflation is 8 to 10% a year. It's been this way for multiple years, which is great, except that if you're an employer, that's not really a great scenario. You're starting to think about, okay, what's the end game? And so a big part of our focus has been saying, well, what does it look like to bring more talent into the open source ecosystem, and how do we make that happen? It used to be people found out about open source by chance. So a buddy showed them, Ubuntu when they were in college, and they really got into it. That's not a great way to scale the #1 operating system in the world. And what we're seeing is what was true for Linux 10 years ago is still true today, in that there is not enough talent. That is also true for every major new open source technology that's coming out. It's true for OpenStack. It's true for Cloud Foundry. It's been true for Node.js, which is coming out now as Java server-side. It's just true in general that when you don't have a proprietary for-profit company driving software products, you don't get the same reaction in terms of, okay, how do we build up staff? And so nobody would ever think to implement SAP without a massive training investment behind it. Somehow they think that they can make a switch to an open source technology, and people are miraculously supposed to figure it out on their own, and that's just not how the world works. That's not how people works. You got to invest in the talent in order to take advantage of the benefits of the software. The good news is you don't pay for open source software. So hey, there's dollars somewhere to invest in the program. So I want to talk a little bit about what the Linux Foundation is doing, not just for Linux, but for open source in general. There's actually a pretty big opportunity here for us to influence the market in a way that improves talent so that you can fill 25 open positions and sometime before 2018. These slides won't be news to you guys, right? It's open source is the new normal. This is some stats on web servers. Apache is the top line. Microsoft is the red one that drops off, and Nginx is coming up. This is true across a whole bunch of things. These are some stats I pulled from Amazon EC2. The blue line is Ubuntu. If you squint, you can see the yellow line is Windows. And then the next two lines are other flavors of Linux, CentOS and Red Hat. It is 90-something% share. 60% of the images available on Microsoft's Azure platform are Linux. Virtually 100% of OpenStack runs on Linux. It really is the new normal. And of course, smartphones, everybody knows Android. Despite Apple's far superior marketing game, is actually by far and away the dominant mobile operating system. So open source is the new normal, and there's not enough talent. Right? There's articles here from Singapore, from the US, from the UK. There's just not enough talent to go around. People are chasing it. My sysadmins tell me that they get hit up on LinkedIn at least once a week. Just headhunters crawling through there saying, oh, he has a pulse and 5 years experience. I should make him an offer. It's a great time to be a sysadmin in open source. It really is. But this is an existential problem for the open source industry because senior corporate leaders do not like uncertainty around where the talent pool is going to come from to operate these systems. They don't like having to poach from their competitors. They don't like having open rec sit there for 9 months while mission critical projects stall out because you just can't find the people. And so, the focus historically has been great code, extensible code, get it out, get it used. This is where we're investing as LF has been around the back end of that on the Wetware. How do we get the people skilled up, not just at the top of the food chain for architects, but all the way down to that entry-level person who does the midnight shift, watching the servers in case the little red light goes off and stuff blows up and smoke starts coming out. So there's a couple of challenges here, right? One is nobody teaches open source. I've had a half a dozen conversations this past year with the chairs or co-chairs of departments of computer science, and they all say the same thing. There is no room in my curriculum to teach this open source stuff. It's all I can do to get ABET accredited and still be 4 years to teach the stuff that I teach today. And so feel your pain, understand that students are very interested, ain't no room in a degree program to talk about this stuff, which is kind of shocking when you think about it, that these people are churning out computer science graduates, knowing that they don't have a core set of skills that they're going to use and need in the marketplace, but they feel sort of trapped by their curriculum pathways and the expectations of a degree program. And the hint, nod of, well, if you guys can give us a bunch of money, we maybe could find a way to make this happen. That might work if you're Oracle. It doesn't work if you're open source, because nobody has that kind of cash to start building buildings and working your way in. So how do you do it? And one of the key things, this is an article referencing a Gartner report talking about the talent shortage and 1.4 million jobs are available and not enough people. The tagline at the bottom is not enough qualified grads to fill even 30% of the jobs in the US. This is not a US only phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon. And they're not learning it in school. So where are they going to learn it? Are you going to hire somebody who doesn't know open source to come practice on your system until they figure it out? Probably not. Certifications have been largely what has filled the gap. And so this was true for a long time. Microsoft and Oracle G and people sort of are used to certifications on for-profit software products. The tide has turned now, and people get that, it's software. You have to train your people on software. There's no magic because of the fact that it's open source. And particularly because open source moves so quickly, one of the things we've heard from our members and our hiring leads over and over is, not only can I not find talent on these open source projects, I don't have enough people in-house to interview those people to figure out if they're good enough. And so you get caught in this sort of crazy cycle where the people who do know it are so busy trying to run the project, half staff, that they don't have the time to go spend 2 hours trying to figure out, do you really know this project? Can you run it? Or have you just read a bunch of articles and you can throw out the sort of, jazz words about the different services and telemetry and OpenStack? So they're very concerned because they're going to pay a lot of money for these people. They're already short-staffed, and so they're very concerned about, how do I know that I'm getting the talent that I think I'm getting? Because I actually don't even have the people in-house to interview that talent deeply enough. And certifications have really filled the gap. And one of the things that they've done is fill it in a very particular way that did not used to be true until very recently, is increasingly true. We as LF think it's actually the new normal, which is that these certifications need to be performance-based. So I don't really care if you can pick the answer out of a lineup in a multiple choice like Law and Order, because that doesn't tell me anything about, when the system goes down, are you going to be able to react under pressure? And so performance-based exams, anybody familiar? Performance-based exams, have taken them? They're not multiple choice. They basically, you have a live system and you have a series of questions saying, configure the firewall to block this traffic on this port and allow this type of service to run in this type of environment. And you actually have to work on the system. And so it's a live system. You have to react to the prompts that you're getting. And it has to be stable to a reboot, and we grade them. There's an automatic script that grades it at the end to look at outcomes. And so we don't actually care what path you take. You can use the world's most exotic service. The key thing is, did you get done the thing that we asked you to get done, and we're inspecting it at a server level? That's what employers can believe in, right? Under time pressure, in an unfamiliar environment, in an unfamiliar interface, are you able to manipulate the system? If you can do that, I've got some confidence now to actually put you into my recruiting funnel, because that's a pretty high pressure environment to be under. That actually is the environment you're going to be under if you're a sysadmin anywhere in the world. So it's actually a pretty good proxy for it. And so many of these Red Hat, of course, the Linux Foundation's programs, the OpenStack Foundation has worked with the Linux Foundation to develop a certified OpenStack administrator. That exam was announced at OpenStack Summit in Tokyo a couple of weeks ago. It's going to be live in April at the next OpenStack Summit, and they're using our platform for that. We've talked to the Hadoop guys about their stuff. We talked to the Cloudera guys about their stuff. I think only Linux Plus is multiple choice on this list. They've all really moved down the path of being performance-based, so that employers actually have some way of telling what are you actually able to do if I turn you loose on my live system. One thing that we talk about, and we've been talking about to our members, is what does the typical growth path look like for adoption in software projects as they get out the gate? And so the kind of orange line there, so the vertical axis is the number of people, the horizontal axis is the flow of time, the green line is DevOps and admins, the orangish line is developers. And that's kind of what you typically see, right? The development community starts to catch on, people get interested, it builds up, it hits critical mass. And then with some lag behind that come the sysadmins. So OpenStack's in this space right now. There's a ton of sandbox implementations of that thing. There's not very many production implementations. People aren't quite ready to pull the trigger yet. And one of the articles I showed earlier spoke to this specifically, which is talent on OpenStack. They're not ready to pull the trigger because they don't believe their organizations have the capability, particularly not for an early stage open source project, which is still evolving quite rapidly. Well, newsflash, every open source project is evolving quite rapidly. So this is sort of the new normal, right? We've gotten to a place in software in general where when products become mature, they're basically sort of ripe for being leapfrogged by the next generation of technology. So there is, this sort of like holy grail of it's a steady state and you have lots of people who get it. Like, it ain't ever coming back. It's just not coming back. As soon as technologies get mature, somebody else leapfrogs it with the next iteration. So you had, VMware that absolutely had a tremendous run of it for a long time until OpenStack comes along. They're at the top of the hill right now. Everybody's thinking about it. And Cloud Foundry is waiting in the wings to go sort of one level further up the stack, right? This is basically an infinite chase up a talent loop. And these curves used to come along maybe every 10, 15 years. These curves are now coming around every 2 or 3 years. There's always new stuff. It's always the same issue. I'll skip by some of this. There's a path there that these things tend to follow. They tend to spike on development when training and certifications become widely available, because that does two things. It gives employers confidence that there's people who know what they're doing, and it gives potential entrance into these marketplaces. And somebody who maybe was a .NETer and is converting, it gives them the confidence that there's structure here and there's going to be employability here from having these credentials. And so you get both a supply and demand side sort of pushing things up. Of course, the challenge in open source historically has been that training and certification has been very, very, very laggy. Or where it has existed, it's been very narrow focus, like Red Hat stuff, Red Hat deployments, which is great if you're using Red Hat, but not so helpful if you're using any of the other distros. And that's sort of fundamentally the challenge. And what we're trying to do at LF is really shift the curves hard to the left. Get more developers involved early, get more sysadmins involved early. And the way to do that is by having training and certification available as early as possible. We're doing this now. Any of you familiar with software-defined networking, the Open Daylight project? In a nutshell, today what happens is you have all your routers, and the value of your network engineers is they know how to reprogram the Cisco router, the Brocade router, the Juniper router to sort of make all that stuff happen. All that is moving to the software layer. That is a massive disruption in the skill sets required of a network engineer. It's a massive disruption in the way in which hard networks get manipulated. It's very early stage technology. It's evolving very rapidly. People don't fully have their arms around it. You need more people in. There's not enough material, and so they're stuck. We're actually working with them to develop some material and ultimately some certification to try to get people hard down that chain of saying, okay, this is a very different way of working, but this is going to be the new normal for how networks get configured. We're not going to any longer be valuing people based on do they know the 16-string command to reprogram a Juniper to route traffic in a certain way. That day's gone. It's never coming back. Everything's moving to the software layer. Talent has to move to that layer. And the things that move those are training. Developers need to know why they should care about a project. They need to know what's the structure. They need to know, what's the syntax and how do patches get submitted and what's the ethos of that ecosystem. Historically, developers have been totally ignored because it's sort of like they're somehow miraculously supposed to find a project that they like and gravitate towards it. Projects are now realizing that you have to do more to reach out to potential developers to bring them in. Because once in a while you have, you guys familiar with Node? You have something like Node once in a while where a lot of people find out about it very, very quickly. That's actually the exception. And so when you have great projects, making investments in the developer side to get more code in more quickly is really, really important, because the more quickly you establish that this is the go-to technology, the more quickly you can get more people in. You get that steep part of the curve. And then on the sysadmin side, people want certainty. They want to know, why will an employer care? And certifications brings that to the table. So they want to know, what function should I care about? What do I need to know? How can I prove it so I can get a job in one of these nice hot things and have that on my resume, which is going to mean more LinkedIn people calling me up with unsolicited job offers, which is, people complain, but they actually really like getting unsolicited job offers. It's kind of a nice reinforcement. Does this sort of resonate with folks in terms of kind of what you've been seeing in the marketplace and the dynamics around open source talent? It's really, really interesting. I didn't come from the open source community. I've been doing this for a couple of years. And people sort of do a double take when you start talking to them about human capabilities and deployment, because it's all been about the code for, I don't know, when did Linus release the kernel? 91. It's been about the code for 20-something years, and it's a bit of a mind shift to think about the people side of the equation. But the people side of the equation is what's holding back even further, more robust adoption of these technologies. And so I want to drill in just a little bit on certification, because that really is, from an employer perspective, that's one of the things that shortcuts the process for them, so they get to know, okay, what am I looking at? Who am I looking at? How can I quickly rack and stack these candidates and figure out which ones I should spend my scarce engineering resource time trying to evaluate? So that, what makes for a good certification program? And this is admittedly sort of very strongly with our bias of how we built our program. So I'll caveat it up front. Because we think this is how, we did not have, as LF, an existing certification program. And so we didn't have to come in and defend how business has been done historically. We sort of looked at the market and said, well, if you're starting a program from scratch, how would you design it? Well, you would not design it by forcing people to go to a Pearson View Center by appointment to take their exam. This is not the 80s anymore. We have the internet. So anytime, anywhere, exam availability. 70% of Linux Foundation certification exams are signed up for by people outside the US. We deliver the exams 24/7, 365. That's the new normal. I don't know if any of you, Amazon isn't open 9 to 5, Mondays to Fridays. I mean, people expect these things to be available, especially if you're a sysadmin and your schedule is crazy. Having to drive. One of our guys is in Madison, Wisconsin. It would take him 4 hours to drive to the nearest Pearson View Center to take a Red Hat exam. It's 2015, guys. You use the internet. So it has to be internet-based, and we do a really interesting thing where we capture your webcam, we capture your screen, we capture your mic. It's pretty secure. We store those recordings for 90 days in case there's any dispute. It does freak people out a little bit. It's you'd think that people would feel more intimidated by going into a testing center, but if you guys have ever been into a testing center, it's a big room and there's one $7 an hour guy wandering around. It's not very intimidating. When you know that you're being stared at by the webcam and that your screen's being captured and your mic's being captured and that it's being recorded, there's a whole lot more accountability. And by the way, our passing rates are actually lower than the passing rates of traditionally administered exams. So it turns out that people don't find miraculous ways to cheat. In part because if you're good enough to cheat, you're good enough to have just passed the exam. It's probably easier to just pass the exam. We had a couple of our senior guys describe ways in which you could cheat, and they are so sophisticated with having to run virtual box at the get-go and set up this like dynamic routing of the screen. It's like, okay, the questions aren't that hard. You should just do the questions. So anytime, anywhere. I've talked about performance-based. This is absolutely critical, right? I don't care if you can pick the answer out of a lineup. I care that you can do the work. That's really what people value. And especially because the technologies are changing so quickly, you really care that they can do the work on the new services as they get rolled out. It's absolutely critical. In the case of Linux, you care that they're distribution flexible. So there's all these different flavors of Linux, right? Red Hat, SUSE, Ubuntu, Kali, etc. We support 3 different flavors so that you can pick either Ubuntu. So there's 3 big distribution families in Linux: Fedora, SUSE, spacing on the last one, Debian. And so we let people pick their flavor. You've got to provide some choice, right? This is not a monolithic world. Open source is not a monolithic place, and so certification programs have to provide some choice that reflects the diversity that tends to exist in reality. It's not always possible, but the bias should always be towards saying, are the choices available reflective of what people are tending to use in the marketplace? So for the OpenStack certification that we're doing, there's a lot of debate right now about whether to offer it both with Puppet and Ansible as deployment tools, because both are actually used sort of fairly equally. Those are the types of things when you evaluate a certification program that you should be looking for, is how much does it reflect the way these tools actually get used in the real world. And up to date, right? So for our Linux exams, we roll it forward of your 3 distribution flavors every time there's a new long-term stable release. So you got to keep up with what's really happening, because tools change, things like systemd, firewalld dramatically sometimes change how hard or how easy certain things are to do. This is one of the challenges with the more static multiple choice exams, is it takes a long time to do a validated multiple choice type exam, and then to psychometrically calibrate it so that there's what's called form equivalency, so that the people who took it last year don't have a harder exam than the people who are taking it this year. The downside of that is they tend not to change very often, because it's really, really hard to put those things together. For performance-based exams, you have a lot more flexibility in trying to make sure that you're keeping the thing at the cutting edge. And everybody wins in this. I talked a little bit about this earlier. The sweet spot of this is that it benefits both individuals and employers, which is really what you need to get going to sort of fill that talent gap. Individuals want to stand out from the crowd. They want to show that they actually have the skill sets. Employers want to simplify their recruiting process. They want to have a bigger pool of people to choose from, and they want to have a higher level of confidence that, when they hire that person, they're going to be good. They're not going to have to fire them and try to rehire them and come back in 12 months and be in the same place. It is dramatically more inexpensive to cycle through the wrong talent than it is to invest in the right talent up front. But it's perversely much harder today in an environment of not enough talent to find the right people to sort of come in and get them lined up for your program. Certification is probably the biggest arrow in our quiver to try to make sure that happens. That's my slides. I didn't want to